So, with it going around that Carlos may be returning to Wednesday, yes, it's only a rumour. Thought it'd be a bit of fun to talk about it today. There's obviously a lot of speculation, worry, sort of genuine just concern around maybe that isn't the best move. For some people who think, yeah, love Carlos, would have him back at the club. It's going to split the fan base, whatever way. But there was something in the media that said that Chansiri and Carlos left it very sort of amicable and that they respect each other quite a bit, and it's sort of like a thing that they didn't burn any bridges, so it is possible that he could return if Wednesday have already appointed a manager by the time this video goes out. Disregard this, obviously. It'll still be fairly relevant in regards to what the actual topic of the video is. Today, we're going to look at managers returning to clubs that they formerly managed at in light of this situation. So we're going to look at 5 managers to give a bit of context of what happens in this sort of situation and what's happened in the past to see if maybe it might just be a good idea. So first up, we're going to go for Tony Pulis at Stoke. I'm not going to go massively into this. This is, if anything, it's more of a plug to go watch my last video if you haven't watched it, because we talk about Tony Pulis being linked with the Wednesday job. He had 2 separate spells at Stoke. His first spell was really successful with them. His second spell, he did all right as well. He had a pretty good career at Stoke, as we found out in that video. But yeah, he is an example, the first example on this list of a manager going back to a club and having some form of success. Next on this list, we've got Nigel Pearson, and that's for his time with Leicester. Both times. It's kind of the theme of this video. He took the job on first time when they were a freshly relegated side. He led them to promotion in that first season, but obviously that's while they were in League One, because they were a freshly relegated League One side, but he got them back into the Championship at the first time of asking. He got them to the 2010 Championship playoffs, which was probably the best he did in his first stint as manager at Leicester. He then went to Hull for a short amount of time before wanting to return to Leicester, and he ended up returning to Leicester a couple of months into the 11-12 season. He had them finishing 9th in his first season back, and then the following season, he had them finishing 6th, which obviously gets you a playoff spot, but they lost in the playoffs to Watford. So that first couple of seasons back, he was challenging, didn't get there, but he was challenging. That sort of challenging mentality really paid off when the next season rocks about. He had first 2 seasons, that was sort of the build, steady progress, 9th, 6th, what comes next for them? They win the title. Obviously, they won promotion to the Premier League at that time. They were a good side. There was a lot of drama in it. They were a quality Championship side, to be fair, and they did deserve to win the league that year. Arguably, as well, you could perhaps give him quite a bit of credit for forming the basis of the team that eventually won the Premier League title under Ranieri. He was a good manager for Leicester, in fairness. There was a lot of controversy around his departure. What do you Leicester fans still feel about him? I do wonder, because I know for quite a while the Wednesday fan base wanted him. It was a name that kept coming up. I don't know if we'd have him now. Would that be somebody we'd be interested in now? Obviously, he has shown that he can get out of the league and he can challenge. But yeah, he obviously, when he was with them in the Premiership, he finished 14th before setting up that side that eventually won the Premier League title in that ridiculous season under Ranieri. So Pearson did have a very successful second stint at the club, and that shows that a manager can come back in some circumstances and really do the business. But perhaps there's a question mark around whether he should have actually left in the first place. Maybe going to Hull wasn't really a good idea, and obviously there wasn't a massive gap in the middle of it. Moving on to Kevin Keegan, who had 2 separate spells at Newcastle. Now, this is going back in time a little bit. This is before my time, probably before quite a few of my viewers' times, but it is relevant because he sort of came back into management more in the modern era, so we'll talk about that in a second. He was initially appointed in 1992 to stop Newcastle being relegated into what would now be classed as League One, because they were on quite the decline at that point. He actually managed to keep them up, and he spent about 5 years with the club after that. In that time, he won the Championship the season after he had managed to keep them in the Championship. So he went from them being strugglers to winning the league in that first season fully in charge. And then this is where it gets a little bit ridiculous. In the following season, he surpassed expectations and had them finishing 3rd in the Premier League. Obviously, that meant qualifying for Europe, which for a team that were in the Championship and struggling for when he came in, to get them to there you can tell why the fans loved him so much. His career sort of followed a similar vein to that during his time, the 5 years he spent at the club in that first stint. He obviously signed players like Alan Shearer as well. That was massive, and you know the history behind signing a player like that. So he was quite influential into some of the club's best times in the modern era. That's not the modern era. You know what I mean? In the past 30 years, he was responsible for some of the best years. And when he first left the club, it wasn't something that usually really happens in football anymore. He just didn't want to be in the game anymore. He didn't want to be a manager. So when he resigned, this doesn't really happen, but the board were trying to convince him to stay because he wasn't going to another club. He wasn't doing anything like that. He just didn't want to be a manager anymore. And eventually he did step down and left amicably, and the fans still adored him, really, obviously. I know I've got some Newcastle fans that watch this. I'm right in saying that, right? I think Kevin Keegan. Don't know what you guys think on him now, but at the time especially, he was a club legend. He obviously also went on to manage England when he did come back into the game. So he has had some quite heights in terms of the stature of the positions he's held within the game. So with all this experience and success, you'd think coming back into the job, let's go back to Newcastle. We've got Kevin Keegan. He was one of our best ever managers, and he's been England manager. What a joy. What could go wrong? Well, nothing really went wrong. It just wasn't amazing. That's possibly because it wasn't really a proper managerial appointment. He came back in 2008 after Sam Allardyce was sacked. The club weren't doing that well, and he came in and stabilised them. That's what he was coming in for. It probably always was that short-term aim. He kept them up and actually got them finishing 12th. This was as Mike Ashley was in the club and things like that. So obviously, times had changed at Newcastle since his earlier time with the club. It'd have been really interesting to see how he'd have done if he hadn't resigned, because he resigned at the end of that season. So obviously he came in, kept them up, didn't want them to see them struggling, and then moved on. He resigned. I would have really liked to see what he could have done there, to be fair. I think Newcastle fans, I don't know what you guys think on that, but it's really interesting because a manager that comes back, he keeps you in, stabilises you after Allardyce, and then just resigns. I don't really know what the sort of thoughts were behind that. Was it just because he had an affinity with the club? But yeah, it's kind of an interesting one that I don't know if it's a successful second stint, but obviously he did stabilise the club, so that could be deemed as some sort of success there. Next up, we've got Kenny Dalglish and Liverpool. Now, he was first appointed as player manager, actually, the only one in this list that was, in 1985, and it was obviously his first managerial role because player manager. In his first season, he kind of achieved probably the peak of his career there. He did the double, won the league, won the FA Cup, beating Everton in the final, so obviously as a Liverpool fan, you can't really ask for much more than that. Next season was a little bit more forgettable. No trophies were won. They got to a final, but that was about it. The next season, he won the title again, which is a great success. So that's a decent season for him, but not quite reaching the heights of his first season in charge. Quite crazy the way he resigned. He resigned in 1988 while Liverpool were 3 points clear at the top of the table, which you'd be like, why? But I really don't know with that one. It's crazy. Like, to me, that's crazy. I wasn't alive. That's why I don't really know what was cracking around the times, and reports are sketchy, things like that, the stuff I've read up. Can anyone enlighten me on what the situation was there? You're top of the table and you resign. Was there disagreements? Did he have enough? No idea. But yeah, let's look at when he came back to Liverpool, and he came back as a caretaker manager. That was in January 2011. He'd already been involved with the club's youth setup for a couple of years under Rafa Benitez, that sort of thing. But then Roy Hodgson came in. They called for his head. They wanted Kenny Dalglish back in because of his past success with the club, because of his history with the club. Let's bring him in as full-time manager, and he did get that. Got that on the back of finishing 6th as caretaker manager, so obviously that wasn't ideal for Liverpool at the time, but he was a caretaker manager. They offered him the contract to stay for a few more years. He did well in his first full season in charge. He came back and got them their first trophy in years in 2012. That was the League Cup, got them to the FA Cup final that year. It seemed like he was coming back. He was coming on strong with that. But here's the thing, even despite that success, wasn't enough for Liverpool at the time, because they didn't qualify for Europe in their league position. So they sacked him. That's just the Premier League all over, really, isn't it? We look at what happened at Man City a few years ago. You win the cup, you get sacked. So much expectation, managerial merry-go-round. We all know it now. But yeah, he came back, had some form of success, but it wasn't enough for Liverpool at the time. The last manager I'm going to talk about before I get a bit more into the Carlos situation is Harry Redknapp during his 2 spells at Portsmouth. I don't actually think I've ever spoke about Harry Redknapp on this channel, which I'm quite surprised about given his stature in the game. Redknapp came into Portsmouth and took them to the Prem at the first time of asking, which is obviously exactly what you want from a manager. He didn't really play nice with Mandaric though, you know, former Wednesday chairman and obviously Portsmouth chairman at the time of what we're talking about now, Milan Mandaric. He didn't get on well with him and he left the club. That was after a season of obviously keeping them in the Premiership after he'd gotten promoted, so he'd done well. Didn't get on with Mandaric, he left. Which is a shame because it was obviously a solid initial appointment for him. You'd think it'd burn bridges, but he did actually come back to Portsmouth a little bit later, in 2005 when they were threatened by relegation. He kept them up, stabilised them, and got given a new contract. Exactly, he came in, did what he had to do again. Funny story actually, he was offered the Newcastle job during the time that Kevin Keegan took it. So, after Sam Allardyce, they wanted Harry. That's possibly why Kevin Keegan took it, actually. It comes around full circle. Makes a little bit more sense for the other story now. He obviously turned it down to stay at Portsmouth. He was happy at Portsmouth at the time. He was on a bit of a project there. Redknapp's biggest success during that second spell has to be the FA Cup final victory. That was a massive overachievement for the club at the time, and it's still regarded as one of their best achievements, I'd say, because if you think about where the club are now, can you imagine them getting to an FA Cup final? They'd absolutely love it. Sad what's happened to that club, in fairness. But yes, that was just an insight in what some second spells of managers have had in the past. So, some have been a little bit more successful than others. Obviously, we're going back in time there. We're looking at different leagues, different situations. But I thought it'd just be a bit of fun to look at where it's happened before, with the talks of potentially Carlos ever coming back to take up that Wednesday role. Now, Carlos Carvalhal gave me some of the best memories, well, the best memories. Full stop, you know. Obviously, Cardiff was massive when I was a kid, but I was at university when all this, the Carlos era happened, so it was amazing for me. Would I take him back now? No. As a man, happily, but actually, I'd possibly take him back. I wouldn't want his team back, and he comes with his team. If you think about how unfit our squad got, how many injuries we had, I don't trust his team. I don't want that in the club. That's what's purged us. That's what's meant we've had troubles over the past couple of years. The first season under Carlos, I would take that like that. I know a lot of Wednesday fans would have him back straight away if it was that sort of situation, but I just remember how stale it got after that. The second season, after the going into the playoffs, I stopped having that feeling that we could beat anyone. You know, we kind of ended up having one style of play and that was it. We couldn't turn up at big matches, and that defeat to Huddersfield was the sort of cement of that. It showed it. We finished fourth that season. We should have really kicked on. It was ours to take, and we didn't. It's really hard because I've got a lot of affection for that manager. He's given me some good memories, but I don't think it's the right time for him to come back in. Not this soon. What I'd really like, here's the ideal situation for Carlos. He goes away. He has success with another club. Then he comes back. He shows that he can do it with another club since us, okay? Because we obviously, we so nearly got there and we had an amazing first season, all right second season, then it just fell off a cliff. But yeah, if he came back after some real success, the fans, I think we'd welcome him back with open arms. But right now, we are quite a united fan base. We do not want something that divisive to come in and split it up again because we're actually all getting on for once. It's weird. But yeah, I'd love to hear all your thoughts, guys, on have you had any experiences with those managers we mentioned earlier? What do you think about Carlos coming back to Wednesday? It's probably going to be a hell no from a lot of you, but I would like to hear all your thoughts in the comments, obviously, if you're supporters of other clubs. What sort of videos do you want me to see me making on here? Is there anything you'd like me to talk about that's currently in the footballing news? I'm enjoying looking at different topics from the footballing world at the minute and just having a chat about it. Commentary style videos, they're a lot of fun to make, so I'm going to keep making them. I'd love some suggestions from you guys. I've already had a few. Make sure you're getting those in the comments. But for now, guys, as always, thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, do all those things, and keep watching right here on Dexterity Box.